This week on the Destination Angler,
I consider the river buffet line, and there's breakfast being served, lunch being served, dinner being served, and there's all types of food on the table. And we've done it, you and I have done it, but if you pour out an M&Ms into a bowl, you will pick through all the M&Ms and eat all the green ones. And why do you sort through all the M&Ms to get the last green one? They're all M&Ms, and they all are the same. But for us, there's a creature, we decide we pick on this one. And I envision the fish doing the same thing. They get hit in the face all day by caddis pupa. They don't eat caddis pupa, they're looking for an ant. And they will let thousands upon thousands of food sources go by so they can selectively pick on the one.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by Outfishers, the trusted source for pre-owned fly rods. That's outfishers.com. And by Anglers Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. Don't leave home without it. And be sure to check out our Facebook and Instagram pages where we post pictures of the destinations we cover and top fly patterns recommended by our guests. Coming up on the Destination Angler is part 2 of the Gallatin River, and then we're headed to Idaho for some off-the-grid alpine lake fishing. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler on the Deschutes River with Elke and Alyssa Littleleaf, who dial us into the 35-mile tribal side of the river, along with some great stories of huge bull trout, pet wolves, Sacagawea, and Chief Joseph. And today, our destination is part 1 of the Gallatin River in southwest Montana, and our guest is competition angler and guide Brian Kimmel of Bozeman, Montana. Starting in Yellowstone Park, the Gallatin flows 100 miles through some of the most gorgeous alpine meadows, canyons, valleys, and farmland on the planet. Known as a wade fisherman's river, you'll find high trout populations, incredible hatches, and great public access. Imagine living across the street from one of the most famous trout streams in the world, the Gallatin. That's Brian. He grew up in Billings and moved to Bozeman in 1990 and has fished this river from head to toe. He was the Orvis Guide of the Year in 1999 and became an outfitter in 2001, where he's guided extensively throughout the state of Montana and Yellowstone National Park for the past 25 years. And there's more. He's a competition angler, having competed on the ESPN Great Outdoor Games and a few others, eventually earning a spot on Team USA. He now coaches the USA Youth Fly Fishing Team. He's also a realtor specializing in, ready for this, ranch and live water properties. Sounds like the kind of guy I need to get to know. Brian gives us a great overview of the Gallatin from top to bottom, shares his philosophy on teaching kids fly fishing, and shares some stories from the filming of The River Runs Through It that I'm sure you've never heard, along with an update on the Yellowstone River after the big flood. And be sure to stick around to the end for a great story of a moose that jumped him on the river. Well, let's dig in. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to start with your Team USA stuff, and you are coaching the kids, right? The youth team, and you guys you did pretty well over in Italy. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I got involved with the USA Youth Team, and I guess I should start. USA Youth Team is an organization that promotes angling, obviously, as fishermen, but also promotes the camaraderie and kind of the ability to work together. It's a group of kids that are generally, we take them as young as 12. They age out at 18, both male and female. And our travel team that we take across the world and across the country starts at 14. And we groom these fine young anglers to compete on a world stage. And this last competition that we had was the very first World Championships since COVID came through. So unfortunately, we had 2 years of downtime. We had a group of very young anglers that, as with some high schools and some universities, the star athletes that were maybe in their senior year didn't go well for them. They weren't able to compete in the things they wanted to do. And we lost 2 years with the COVID event. And then this year we fielded a team of 6 young gentlemen and went to Italy and competed in the Youth World Fly Fishing Championships.
Okay. How'd you do?
We took 4th, which I thought was a pretty good showing for us, given that none of our team had world experience prior to that. Well, one member of our team had world experience prior to that. But it's really hard to get all of the information that you need and to execute very well in a short amount of time in a country and waters that the kids have never seen.
Yeah, I'll say. When you get out there, do you have some time, like a couple days beforehand, to fish the rivers that are going to be in the competition?
Most of the time with the competitions, we try to do a pre-trip and get over to the host country once prior to the no fishing buffer timeline. So in World Championship fishing, you're not allowed to fish 60 days prior to the venue on that particular venue. So if the river is in the competition, you're not allowed to fish it 2 months prior to the event. So we do go over, try to get a pre-trip in, get a little bit of an understanding, and then bring that information back, pick the kids that we feel will be the very best for the style of water and the different watersheds that we're going to fish. And then we're usually in country 10 days prior to the event, fishing each of the watersheds prior, or at least competition practice waters that they lay out for us.
Okay.
And then we get an opportunity to gain confidence in certain patterns and techniques and styles that then we deploy during the World Championships proper.
Right. And what, as a coach, like, what does that mean? Like, how do you coach these kids? How do you kind of bring them along?
So a lot of the coaching starts at a younger age. I host a handful of clinics here in Montana, previously in Colorado and Idaho. And we field talent of young anglers, generally, again, between 12, 14, 15, that have a solid fishing background that maybe want to take their game to the next level. And once they come to our clinics, we try to teach in these 3-4 day clinics, techniques, styles, patterns, approach. And then at the end of the few days of our clinics, they usually come out with a pretty good understanding of whether or not this is a path they're going to go down. And then we have a national championship that allows all of the kids who came to the clinics to come and compete at nationals.
Okay.
And at nationals, then you kind of get a ranking as to where you are amongst the other kids in the program. And then also that allows us to pick the next year's world's team.
Yeah. So what's the hardest thing to teach, these teenagers as you're trying to bring them along?
I think the hardest thing to really teach the kids is the commitment that goes into this. And it is not necessarily something you dabble in. It is a path that you really have to take seriously and you have to put a lot of time into. And it's difficult for a lot of the kids to, give up some soccer or some tennis or some baseball to be involved in the fishing. But I think that commitment of getting involved fully and immersing yourself and, kind of living and breathing fly fishing for the next, 5-6 years of their life.
Okay. I was reading about this. I was just kind of fascinated by this because you were quoted somewhere as saying that, that you love coaching, teaching, and sharing your fly fishing philosophies. And I'm wondering, like, what are your fly fishing philosophies? If you don't mind me asking, I'd love to hear more about that.
So we have a series of coaching staffs. We have our head coach, we have a Western coach, a Northeast coach, and a Southeast coach. And a lot of the clinics that we do, if we hold a clinic in Pennsylvania, it's generally a little bit more different than a clinic in Idaho. And then the Idaho clinic is dramatically different than North Carolina, and that's different than Montana.
Okay.
So as the kids move through these programs, we teach them a lot of European nymphing styles, a lot of competition techniques and styles that go into we're no longer fishing, we're harvesting fish at that point, because the competition does, push us into, gaining as many fish as we can. So those philosophies that I teach here, a lot of the times I have the kids take all of their, the competition style fishing revolves around ultralight tippets, high sticking, 10-foot 2 weights, 11-foot 1 weights, very, very fine tippets, very long rods, very little casting, and most rods without, majority of the rods really don't have a lot of fly line. So we're not extending long casts during the competition style fishing. So to come back to your point, Steve, on my philosophy here, I take all of that away from them when they come to Montana. And we go to the river and we throw single dry flies. We go to the river and we understand the flow of the river and why these things are taking place. And get away from the competition side of, I don't care that you caught 10 fish, 5 fish, 50 fish. I care that you saw the bird fly across the river and grab the spruce moth out of the tree. I care that you watch the rhythm of the hatch and understand where these fish are at certain times of the hatch in certain places of the river, depending on when these insects are coming out, and understanding where these fish like to eat, where these fish like to lounge, and where they spend their day to day.
That's cool. Are kids surprised by that? I bet they come out there thinking, I'm going to just really be hammering away with my Euro nymphing rod here, and you have them do something different.
I think what happens in the competition scene, and if you talk to a handful of other competition anglers, you do get a very narrow focus. And that focus is really designed to harvest as many fish as possible in a short amount of time. And that is not done with a dry fly, and that is not done with the streamer. It's done with styles and techniques that promote a catch rate. And then the catch rate is really based upon connectivity to the fish and understanding what portions of what styles of fishing you take from your day to day to create the next phase, if you will, of nymph fishing. And a prime example of that is when you talk about Western fly fishing or nymph fishing, 80%, maybe 85%, maybe even higher percentage of people run a strike indicator, 7 feet a leader to a piece of weight to a 1 fly or 2 fly setup. It's always thrown upstream. It's always mended. You catch your fish.
Yeah.
The European styles and the competition styles put us in contact with the fly the second it touches the water until the second it leaves the water. So the detection of knowing when the fish has you is improved. The styles of hooks that we use and the new materials and new fly patterns and new rods and lines and things that have come from the competition world into everyday fly fishing. We see it with stiletto hooks and jigs, heavier tungsten beads, longer rods, center diameter rods.
What is that, a center diameter rod? Never heard of that.
Just different diameter rods, sorry.
Okay.
A lot of the rods are super, super, super thin, very, very sensitive, and fold almost tip to tail.
Interesting. And what's a stiletto hook? I've not heard of that either. What is that?
Stiletto hooks are just a term we use throughout the competition scene, as they're manufactured barbless hooks with a very fine hypodermic style point, very, very sticky, as we call it.
Okay.
And once you touch the fish, generally, they generally don't come off the hook without some help from you.
How about that? That sounds like a plan to me. Oh my gosh. Well, we can get more into techniques a little bit later, but I just super fascinated by that. And what a neat job to, be teaching kids, not only how to fly fish, but what it's kind of all about, which sounds like what you're doing with your philosophy. So good for you. Hey folks, super excited to have a new sponsor on the show. They're called Outfishers, and they buy and sell pre-owned fly rods at a discount. They have all the leading brands such as Sage, Hardy, Scott, Orvis, Loomis, Winston, and more. And what I really love about these guys is they have thought of everything so you can buy with confidence. First, they certify every rod with a 100-point inspection. Then they clean, test, and rate each rod on a 1 to 10 scale. Then they photograph every rod so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy, including any chips, scratches, or scuffs. And what's really cool is they offer a lifetime warranty and a 30-day returns policy with free shipping. So if you don't like your rod for any reason, you can return it within 30 days, no questions asked. Sounds like a pretty cool idea to me, so head on over to outfishers.com to check them out. And tell them Steve from the Destination Angler sent you. That's outfishers.com, the source for pre-owned fly rods. Hey anglers, are you looking for a darn near perfect cup of coffee to start your day? Then do yourself a favor and check out anglerscoffee.com. That's right, Anglers Coffee is made by anglers for anglers, delivered to your doorstep, one batch at a time. They start with the very best coffee beans selected for their great flavor and responsible growing methods. Then each batch is roasted fresh daily. The result is a wide selection of roast styles that will satisfy the most discerning coffee lover. And now you can enjoy Angler's Coffee anywhere, anytime with the dry dropper single-serving coffee in a tea bag. Just add water. And this isn't your mother's instant coffee. It's a single serving of carefully dark roasted, fresh ground and nitro-sealed coffee. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations that directly impact the fly fishing community. So head on over to anglerscoffee.com to check out their great selection of coffee and the organizations they support. If you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. That's Angler's Coffee. It's darn near perfect. All right, so you've been fishing the Gallatin a long time, and I'm curious, like what is it about the Gallatin that really just draws you in? What do you love about it?
I think first and foremost, as with most anglers that, have access to trout water, sometimes it's about just being close, and sometimes it's about just true simplicity. And for me in the Gallatin, if I look, I can't see it because of the smoke today, but I'm close enough to it that I can go, at leisure, and I can take 4 flies stuck in my hat and a spool of tippet and my fly rod, and I need very little else.
Easy.
Super, super easy. And, conversely, if we go to, say, the Missouri River, it's a massive tailwater, it's float fishing, it's gear, tackle, endless amounts of gadgets and, arts and crafts that you need to take with you.
Fly boxes.
Get up to that water.
Right. So because you live near it, you know it so well. Yeah, super simple, right? You know the 4 flies that are going to work tonight, and you've got them with you. What about for the guy who's coming from somewhere else and hitting the Madison or the Gallatin? What would you tell that guy about why this river is so amazing?
The Gallatin allows lots of things to happen. So if you're a younger, more athletic, 20-something that wants to really get in there, turn and burn fish, there's a lot of access to the water that's a little bit higher consequence. There's a big chunk of the Gallatin that is a massive boulder field, and it's generally known as the rafting section, if you will, also known as the Mad Mile. It drops over 100 feet with a steep grade in this mile section, so lots of heavy whitewater, big rocks, big consequence when you're wading. And then on the other end of that spectrum, there are these beautiful grassy meadows further upstream that a gentleman in their late 80s could enjoy as well without worrying about stepping in or being swept away. So the diversity of the river is really one of the things that I do love about it. I can fish downstream from me is about 30 miles to the mouth with the Missouri.
Okay.
And I'm about 25 miles from Big Sky, and then another 25 miles up to the park line, and then another 10 miles inside the park. So it's the closest river that I do have, and I can be fishing in the Gallatin 2-3 minutes from the house, And I can fish a nice productive stretch here just outside of, Bozeman down here in the Gallatin Valley.
Right. How is the fishing down kind of in and through Bozeman?
The unique thing about the Gallatin down here is because it is surrounded by private land and, the largest landholder being Ted Turner and Turner Enterprises, they have a very large chunk of the river that runs through their property. So Montana Stream Access allows us some accessibility, but the reality of the access law is it affords you an entry, but it is very difficult, as we all know, to wade, 100 yards upstream, let alone 3 or 4 miles upstream to get into, some of these better spots. So this section of the Gallatin does not see as much pressure as, say, the section directly upstream of that particular piece of property that starts at the mouth of the canyon.
Okay.
And we don't see that pressure. We see a larger increase in brown trout numbers down here. The habitat is a little bit more conducive for the brown trout. A little more channels, more undercuts, more darkness, bigger holes, and a little bit slower grade. And with that comes great hatches as well. And, the bottom end of the valley here, being 10 minutes from downtown Bozeman, may be the least utilized piece of the Gallatin that there is. And mainly is because of access.
Yeah, right. I wonder if you could kind of give us a rundown on the major sections of the river, so I know it starts in the park. You just said 10 miles in the park, and then kind of describe those different sections if you could.
So the upper end of the Gallatin, starting in Yellowstone Park, with Gallatin Peak and the very upper headwater tributaries, the Gallatin is maybe 2 or 3 feet wide at that point. It's a really small mountain, pristine mountain stream. I would say up until, now it seems several years, but there was a point where I think the spring water that dumped in there, you could dip your cup in and, the water was just pristine. And the water flows out of that section of Yellowstone Park moving north. Majority of Montana's waters flow north. The highest point in the state is right on the Wyoming border. The lowest point is, on the Canadian border, outside of the Port of Whitlash. So we have this huge, river system. Majority of our river systems, like I say, running north. So as you leave the Bighorn Lake area and you leave Gallatin Peak area, you end up in the lush meadows of Yellowstone Park in the northwest corner. And it's not much of a river, like I say. It becomes more and more of a river with each of the tributaries. So as the river comes through these meadows, very easily waded, always have, bear activity, moose activity, elk activity. Once you step foot in Yellowstone Park, you obviously dramatically increase your opportunity at coming in contact with wildlife. Yeah. So that is ever present in that portion of the Gallatin. Majority of the fish up there, brook trout, cutthroat trout, handful of rainbow, a handful of the last remaining grayling in the Gallatin system dwell up there. And we do find some larger rainbow and brown trout from time to time sneaking into that area. Once the midsummer heat kind of comes into that area and the waters get low, the fish do migrate up into, some of the headwaters to the very upper end to stay in cooler water.
That area in the park is known for having some pretty good sized fish too, isn't it?
It does. The river system comes down, meets with Fawn Pass and Fawn Creek, meets with Bacon Rind Creek, Sage Creek, Taylor's Fork. There's a handful of tributaries that will double the flow of the Gallatin each time the tributary dumps in. So by the time the river meets Big Sky, which is 25 miles from Yellowstone Park in the upper Meadow Run area, a little bit more grassy up there, some sagebrush. The river is a sizable watershed once it reaches Big Sky.
Right. Hey anglers, if you're like me, you're always on the hunt for new trout streams to explore, but finding these hidden gems can be challenging. Well, not anymore, because there's a new app I highly recommend called Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out every trout stream by state with detailed access maps for every stream. They have over 15 different map layers with hundreds of thousands of access points, color-coded stream ratings, public land, and more. Just this spring, I was in the driftless region of Wisconsin, and man, was it awesome to have the Trout Routes app on my phone to help us do some exploring. Trout Routes made it so easy to find new water and access points that we never would have known about. They also have local fly shops, the ability to take notes, and even local stream regulations, and you can download maps for offline use as well. Today, Trout Routes covers 25,000 trout streams in 33 states, and they just added Arizona, New Mexico, and Arkansas, with Utah and New York coming soon. So if you have an upcoming trip or are looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Don't leave home without it. I tell you, I was out there this summer, and we backpacked into Yellowstone, and yeah, there was a lot of bear activity. Matter of fact, I couldn't believe it. As I was hiking in there, I bumped into one of the guides that I interviewed on my show, Shane McLaughlin, he's now my number one show. We did a show on the backcountry of the Yellowstone, and here he comes riding. I look at the guy, and I'm like, I've not met him in person, but it looks like him. He's got the red bandana, and I yell at him, "Hey man, is that Shane?" And he's like, "Who's that?" And then we had this great conversation. I bumped into this guy in 2.2 million acres of wilderness, and here's the guy interview. And he said that, he asked us where we were camping, and we told him, and he said, "Well, there was a grizzly bear. We camped there last night. There was a grizzly bear that came through our camp last night." And I was like, okay, here we go. And my son and I did some hiking further up, and lots of bear scat on the trail, bear prints. And when we came out, there was a new pile of bear scat. I'm sure it was new. It was very fresh. And we came out, lots of scraped trees, they scrape straight up and down in those trees. And of course, the park has to throw in a sign that says bear management area, just to make sure that you're not alone up there. So, but we didn't do that well. We were up there for 3 days fishing, and it was tough fishing. And I had heard that they kind of get lockjaw up there. And, Shane, they caught nothing on that trip. They were just one night, but they didn't catch a thing. And I don't know what it was, but I wonder what's your experience up there when the fishing gets a little tough? Like, what's the answer, or is there one?
First and foremost, you're up there in an area that you kind of have two things that can happen. A, you have a group of fish earlier in the spring that are eager and hungry. They haven't seen a lot of daylight. They've been frozen over for a while. They're super ready to eat. They're willing to eat just about anything. And it's a funny thing, as the summer rolls on and we start getting midsummer, we start moving in towards fall, the fish do become a little bit more educated. And it's really hard for an angler who has maybe fished like the Dream Stream, if you will, or one of these noted, very difficult fisheries where you watch fish, you look at fish, you see the interactions, and you don't expect that with the Gallatin.
Yeah.
And I think there's this notion with the Gallatin that it is supposed to be an easier fishery. And with that comes a lot of conversation about catching a lot of 8 to 10 inch fish. And the second portion of that area up there is that, the fish do get scared to death from time to time. There's raccoons, otters, the bear, the osprey, the eagle. They're in really skinny, shallow water, crystal clear, almost transparent water. So the fish become ultra spooky. And normally what separates a lot of anglers is the distance they can fish away from themselves. And if you have the ability to fish a little bit further away, you tend to get a little bit better collection of fish, or you start to see, more fish come to your fly. But a lot of those areas, you do find the spooky nature of these fish, and they feel you walk up the bank, and they tuck themselves under the undercut.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
they lock jaw up, just like you've experienced, and they allow you to walk right by and keep on going.
Yeah. I did hook one very nice fish, and I got a video of it out on my Instagram page. It was pretty exciting. I saw it. I thought I had a salmon on there. It was very big. And on 4X, because I got a tip from somebody who said, man, make sure you use 4X up there because you want to get those big ones in. And I could not stop him. He went up against the undercut bank and wrapped around something, and that was it. But it was fun because I got to see him, and it was a really nice fish. But, we just didn't catch that many. But when the water, so the water was 42 degrees in the morning, And to me, that sounds like they're going to be in deeper, slower water when it's that cold. But what do you think? When do they move up into the riffles if the water really isn't even getting over 50 degrees? Are they moving into the riffles?
What we see, especially with the Gallatin fish, I do think that there is a textbook or an encyclopedia of knowledge that does tell us, question A is answered by answer A, and question B is answered by answer A or answer B. Sorry, and sometimes these fish aren't doing exactly what you think they're doing. We see a lot of fish in the Gallatin living in 4 inches of water, sunning themselves, warming themselves, even when water temperatures are a little bit cooler. So you do have a group of fish that are going to move towards these deeper holes and these deeper runs. But you also have this group of fish that are also going to move into 3 and 4 inches of depth of water up there.
Huh.
And they make a living up there in that water. It is another section of the Gallatin that doesn't really receive a lot of pressure. I would say the heaviest pressured sections of the Gallatin run between Big Sky and the mouth of the canyon.
Yeah.
And the difference in angler population there compared to the upper meadows and the areas that we know as the meanders in Yellowstone Park and coming up, just inside the park line, it may be 1,000 people at Big Sky and one up there.
Yeah, we see anybody, not a single angler.
Yep, the pressure is dramatically different up there. It does afford for that better quality fish to live up there, but just because they don't get pressured does not mean that they're not wise and they're not paying attention to their environment as well. They're not starving, obviously. They're nice, great, big, thick, healthy fish. And I don't know if you notice the fish that you catch up there, very few of them have hook scars. Most of the fish, almost all of the fish, are exceptionally clean. There's still a lot of pure strain genetics of the original rainbows, the Yellowstone cutthroat, a handful of West Slope cutties up there, the mountain whitefish, the brown trout,
yeah,
and the brookie. So depending on the situation, time of day, and the area up there, it can really dictate your angling success. I do think that in this day and age, as we've become much better anglers, our techniques, our fly patterns, our materials have gotten better. We've educated the fish much quicker. And I think if you go with the idea that a Parachute Adams, and I'm just going to pick on the Parachute Adams, for example. Parachute Adams today has probably 200 variations. And one of those variations may have a little bit of sparkle or a shine or something to it that is the next great thing. You look through all of the fly manufacturers' catalogs, and every year there's something new, there's something new, and there's something new. And you go back to a Trude or you go back to a Wolf. You do catch fish on those patterns from time to time.
Yeah.
And they work. They're day in, day out producers. Now, as you move into the next realm of, fly patterns and selections, some that have trailing shucks or a little bit of antron that shines just a little bit different, that maybe catches the fish's eye. We're stepping up our game. We're producing more patterns. We're presenting them better with thinner tippets that are stronger, with hooks that are sharper and a little bit more sticky, and rods that can punch it, 50 feet up the river, and beautiful casts and whatnot. So as our game's gotten better, we've educated these fish as well. And that educated fish, a lot of people do expect at certain places, but maybe not necessarily on the Gallatin. But the Gallatin fish, very, very spooky fish from time to time, and, discerning. It's funny, I liken the fish and how I teach a lot of the kids fishing is I consider the river buffet line, and there's breakfast being served, lunch being served, dinner being served, and there's all types of food on the table. And we've done it, you and I have done it, but if you pour out an M&Ms into a bowl, you will pick through all the M&Ms and eat all the green ones. And why do you sort through all the M&Ms to get the last green one? They're all M&Ms, and they all are the same. But for us, there's a creature, we decided we pick on this one. And I envision the fish doing the same thing. They get hit in the face all day by caddis pupa. They don't eat caddis pupa. They're looking for an ant. And they will let thousands upon thousands of food sources go by so they can selectively pick on the one. And I see that taking place more and more in all the rivers that I fish, and especially some of the higher pressured waters as well. I've been blessed to see them back when I was a rookie guide and the old school guard, just didn't even talk to us back in the day.
Oh, really?
And fishing was super easy. Yeah, there was always something about the young buck, and this was a time frame just prior and during the boom of a river runs through it. And all of a sudden, our guiding industry exploded, and there's a core group of us that started during that time. It was just the time that it was. But there was a group of a little bit older guides that, they'd been at it for a long time, have been out there by themselves for a really long time. And when they started seeing us show up, it wasn't tension or anything of that nature, but they set us straight. They told us to, boat ramp etiquette, river etiquette, things of that nature, to really get us on the right path. But definitely, seeing that change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, kind of back to the river. So after you get out of the park, then what's the section from there? How would you describe that?
So once you leave Yellowstone Park, you start to gain a little bit more volume, and you get a handful more tributaries dumping in. You do get a little bit more gradient as that starts to pick up. The canyon area of Big Sky or the Gallatin, if you can kind of think of the Yellowstone Park water being, up on the second floor of a house, and the whole second floor, very smooth, very kind, very moving. And then all of a sudden you go down the stairs. And the Gallatin's very similar. As you leave Yellowstone Park, you start to come down the stairs, and you come towards the front door as you come towards Big Sky. So you pick up a little bit more flow. You pick up more grade. You pick up larger rocks. Because of the grade, the drop in elevation, you go from, golf ball size rocks to softball and basketball size rocks. So it starts to become a little bit greasier when it comes to the wading. There's a little bit more structure, more oxygen in the water as well, a lot more insect and a lot more biomass also being able to survive in that heavily oxygenated water. You also, with that portion of the canyon, you get a lot of shade, and you get a lot of high mountainsides and hillsides that keep shade and the sun off the water for longer periods of time. So you start to see the hatches materialize a little bit more, and in particular, the timing and the rhythm. And you always hear people talk about being able to set their watch by a hatch. And that section, as it comes in just upstream of Big Sky and through that area, the PMDs hatch at 10 a.m. The yellow sallies are out at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. You get some caddis from time to time, during midday. And then you get, 6 weeks of, evening caddis. And that section of the water, because of its makeup and because of the hydrology and everything that goes through that area, just a little bit more rich, a little bit more insect activity. Fish population starts to grow a little bit more. We start to see more fish numbers of rainbows, in particular in that little bit faster water, and we start to see a little bit more of the brown trout as well there.
Okay, sounds pretty good.
It's a beautiful place up there. You do get up against the cliff walls, and it's not as dramatic as, say, like Flaming Gorge or things of that nature, but it's very, very similar in the sense that you have this 2,000 feet of vertical relief going from the edge of the river, up a 45-degree slope up to tree line.
Cool.
And you look downstream and you see it turn from mountain to mountain to mountain. So the river starts to tighten up a little bit as it cuts its way through the mountain, and it picks up a little bit more grade.
Yeah. Okay. And then from there, you enter the canyon area that you said was super busy?
So you end up coming in towards Big Sky, and from the traffic at Big Sky these days and the population that's up there and the outfitting, the guiding community that's up there doing, the services, guiding is really a consumer service, and it's no different than going to a restaurant. We always talk about the commercial user and the commercial guide and the commercial, but it really, at the end of the day, what we do is we provide a service to a lot of people that either don't have the time or don't have the knowledge they need, or maybe the physical capabilities to do the wading or to fish by themselves. So the guide population works out of Big Sky. So 5 to 10 miles either side of Big Sky becomes very busy from that standpoint. There's also 3 major campgrounds. There is, Bozeman Population Center, and a very quick half-hour drive for an evening caddis hatch. It's about as far up as people like to drive. And it's got a lot of great water, a lot of bigger water, holding water, larger riffles. And the river's, 2/3 larger than it is in Yellowstone Park. So all of a sudden you have a much larger river system to fish.
That's cool. Where do we go from there?
So as we wind our way down from Big Sky, a lot of the river at that point you start to see a little bit of private land ownership, although stream access again allows you and the affordability to, wade through. But you're inside the Gallatin National Forest. You've left Yellowstone National Park. And I always like to say, these are public lands. And we're public land owners, you and I both, and everybody listening to this podcast. And as we work our way through Yellowstone Park, we have the pristine beauty up there. Water quality is immense. Life is great as it moves down the valley. It enters Gallatin National Forest. It's protected again. And, for a river that has 100 miles of length, and to have 80 miles of it completely accessible at any given time is really remarkable.
That is.
You can pull over, you can drive 50 miles up that river, and you can pull over anywhere you want to and fish and step in.
Yeah. You've got the highway that runs right along next to it for most of that, right?
We do, and that's one thing that, as an angler, you stand in the river, you look at the road, and you kind of complain about the cars, but when you're driving in your car, you're looking at the river, you're finding a place to fish.
Yeah, right.
So you have to take the good with the bad there. We didn't hike 12 miles to get there. So, as you leave Big Sky and you come downstream, the river, the canyon tightens up even just a little bit more, and we start to see a little bit more Class 2, Class 3 whitewater on kind of a regular day, and then Class 4 and 5 as high water hits.
Okay.
And high water for us usually runs Mother's Day to Father's Day is kind of a good bet that the freestones in Montana are going to be offline.
Yeah.
And some of the larger freestones take a little bit longer to come in, but generally, Mother's Day to Father's Day is kind of a wash up here in our area. And it gets turned over to the whitewater group. And, the Gallatin right now, I think, is running at 450 CFS. And this season, it topped out just under 10,000.
Oh,
so
wow.
we had a big water year. As everybody heard about the Yellowstone and some of the flooding that we had here, the Gallatin saw a little bit of this swell. It didn't create havoc or do a lot of destruction. It was just a good cleansing for the river.
Oh, really?
Well, because we do have the road, and it does service the ski area. They do sand a lot. They do put a lot of product out there. And in the spring, every time it snows, they sand. And in the spring, it all melts. It kind of lays along the side of the road. The plow trucks, no fault of them, they send it over the guardrail, and it lines all the rocks along the edge of the river. So you do get this layer of, we call it cat litter because that's what it looks like.
Huh, no kidding. I hadn't thought of that.
Yep, it's just the sand they use for the DOT.
Right.
So the high water comes in and rinses all of that off. It takes a lot of the sediment load out of the river, polishes, makes the river just stunningly beautiful once the water does come down. The water comes through a couple of different phases. We have kind of the chocolate milkshake, then we have the mocha, then we have the green dream color, and then we have the clear. And each of those phases you can fish, and you can do well in each of those. A lot of people don't like fishing in the mud, but the fish still eat daily. So if you have a program you can run with murkier water or muddy water, you can do just fine there. Then we start to see a little bit of change in color to a lighter brown, where as the water's rising, it's taking away the bank, it's cleaning out the mud. But as soon as the water stabilizes and the water starts to drop, we instantly start to notice clearing. And it goes through, like I say, these phases of clearing and clarity. And it's basically visibility in the water. It goes from being 6 inches to 12 inches to 18 to 2 feet to 4 feet to, transparent.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. And where did they film The River Runs Through It? Because it was up in the Gallatin somewhere, right?
So River Runs Through It. A lot of the river sequences were filmed downstream of Big Sky. and upstream of the mouth of the canyon, which is about 15 miles or so from Bozeman.
Okay.
Several of the sequences of a river runs through it. In particular, the Bare Bottom Bridge, as they like to call it, was the main concrete bridge that one of the characters fell asleep in and sunburnt himself.
Yeah, right. Yep. Remember that?
Yep. That bridge sits there just upstream of Spanish Creek. And then some of the fishing scenes, in particular, Brad Pitt, catching the large fish there.
On a bunion bug.
On the bunion bug. Yep.
Whatever that is.
Due to movie magic, looked great. For us that were here and watching all of that take place, it was a funny little setup for that.
Really?
And I had some fishing guides and a couple of rafting guide friends during that time frame that, they're filming a river runs through it. You've got, Robert Redford hanging out the side of this boom truck. You've got Brad Pitt standing in the water. You've got a movie guy upstream with a bullhorn yelling, 5 minutes, and then all the raft companies have to stop. And they're all pulled over on the side of the river. Yep, while they do these film shoots.
Huh.
And the the raft guides are all sitting up top, they hear, cut, roll film, whatever they do to, start their filming. And there was one raft guide in Big Sky that will remain anonymous. He knows who he is, and some of my friends hearing this will know who this is. But they'd yelled, action, and he told his boat, like, okay, everybody, let's go. And they took off down the river, and they paddled, and they paddled, and they paddled, and they got into the movie sequence section. There's a bunch of people standing on the bank yelling at them, and they floated through, and this raft guide looks and goes, look, there's Robert Redford, look, there's Brad Pitt, and everybody on his boat got to see this. And they float through the section. Well, that evening, one of the guys from the production crew calls the raft company and says, something to the effect of, it's going to cost you $200,000 a day if your rafts keep coming through here, because we're going to bill you for the time spent.
Oh, geez.
So there's kind of a funny, story there amongst the raft guides up here about.
That's hilarious.
Him zipping through the river runs through it film sequence.
That's hilarious.
But a lot of the river runs through it shots were all done mid-canyon, right in the section that we know as Storm Castle. And the quintessential movie shot, him standing on the rock with the sunlight behind him. I can tell you, Steve, I've seen thousands of people stand on that rock.
Oh, really?
And get a picture making a false cast. Yep. It's all still there. It all looks still the same, obviously. But yeah, it definitely brought a lot of attention to the fishing industry and brought new life into fly fishing as well.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah, I've heard that. My dad and I started going to Montana in 1994, which I think was a year after the movie came out. It definitely caught our interest. So guilty. I'm curious, Brian, in all your years of guiding and competition angling, like what kinds of things have you seen? Like funny clients or wildlife? What kinds of stories can you tell us?
There's several. I kind of break them down into different sections, and you have guide interactions, you have public interaction, you have fish interactions, and you have wildlife interactions. And sometimes running into a human makes things funny. Sometimes running into, another guide makes things funny. But, we had a couple of, one funny story about the moose, and I've got a couple, and we talk to a lot of the guides, in the West, and, they'll give you an idea of 4 or 5 different moose stories, but yeah. I've got 2 moose stories, one on the Madison, one here on the Gallatin. But on the Gallatin, where I was fishing with this older gal here in town, and we're fishing away in the Gallatin, and all of a sudden we see just cars on the highway, and all of a sudden the cars stop, and I'm looking up, and she goes, wow, what do you think's going on up there? Was there a car wreck? And all of a sudden there's 5, 10, 15 cars, 20 cars, and we're waist deep in the river looking back at the highway. Like, that was so strange.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, if I was in Yellowstone Park, I would think they were all looking at something. And that is the moment that the light bulb went off in my head. And her and I turned around, and not 20 feet behind us on the bank that we weren't paying attention to is this moose with her calf.
Oh, shoot.
And we turn around, and we're waist deep, and we cannot go towards the highway. We have to go back towards the moose if we're going to go at all. And this cow moose looks at us, looks at her calf, looks back at us. And it had this interaction to the sense of the moose saying, do you see this?
Yeah.
I see you, and you are in the way of me going over to here.
Yeah.
I mean, not a word was spoken, but I understood what was happening at that moment. She jumped off the bank, landed 5 feet from us, 10 feet from us at a maximum, laid her ears back, brought up her hackles on her neck, and I just about grabbed my client to do kind of the nesty plunge. We were going to fall in and float away. That was my exit strategy at that time.
Moose jumped from the bank into the river at you.
I was in the way of where she was headed, is how I looked at it.
Okay.
I didn't think she was coming to me to stomp me into the ground like the other moose story.
Yeah.
But she jumps in, she stands there, she looks at me, she looks back at her calf, she looks at me, and I don't know if she whistled, snorted, grunted, whatever she did, and the calf jumps in.
Oh, wow.
And that moose takes 2 steps, and I'm not a fly rod away from her at this point. You know, we're less than a fly rod length. She's standing there, her calf goes across the river, steps up on the bank and shakes. She looks at me, looks at the calf, takes 2 steps towards me, goes around us, goes across the river, does the hopscotch, jumps up on the bank. Both the cow and the calf look back at us and then head up the bank.
Off they go.
And the gal standing next to me says, that was the coolest thing I had ever seen.
Yeah, bad.
And to this day, I know she had no idea what type of danger we were in.
That was serious.
At that moment.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that moose decided wasn't my day, or we weren't worth the move. But there's a lot of places on the Gallatin that the willows grow really tall, the forest is really thick, the river is really loud, and you do have to take moments in time to kind of look around.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. And this was, I'd been a guide for quite a while, so I understood, keeping my head on a swivel when I was outside. But when I saw the cars line up on the road and I looked across and everybody started to get out with their cameras, there was this just feeling of coldness that went over us. And I turned around.
Oh.
And when I saw that animal, that was the, good grief moment, if you will.
Your heart sank a little bit. Like, because you understood the danger and your client maybe didn't and thought it was cool. I mean, it's kind of cool talking about it now, however many years later, but yeah, I hope you had a roll of toilet paper in your car when you got back to your truck.
It's an animal that, I always try to convince myself just so I feel better about being out in the woods. But I convince myself that the bear you can convince you're not a threat if you don't scare it. The moose, their protocol is just to kill everything they come in contact with, and that solves all their problems.
No kidding.
The coyote, the wolf, whatever, whatever is coming after them, they just take care of it, and that's how they go through life.
Huh.
Where a lot of the other wildlife, I think there's this moment in time where there's somewhat of a reckoning between yourselves. And the bear, like I say, if you're non-threatening most of the time, they don't really want a problem with you. But the moose is a different animal. The moose I'm probably the most scared of here in Montana.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that wraps up part 1 of the Gallatin River. A big thanks to Brian for being on the show. Be sure to come back next time for part 2 of the Gallatin River, where Brian shares stories of growing up in Montana, fishing and camping with his brother and his dad, guiding in the Wind River Range, and fishing other great rivers in Montana. And hey, thank you for listening. We'll be sure to post Brian's contact info in the Destination English show notes and pictures of his top fly picks on our Facebook and Instagram page. You can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music was by our Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everyone.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.